Our next special presentation. This will come to us from the Honorable Samuel Twea, the Minister of Finance and Development Planning in Liberia. And as some of us may know, he is an economist and a development practitioner. He really comes to us with this viewpoint that in Africa, we've come to the end of development. That is, the developing and emerging countries, they have been able to master many of the techniques necessary and now just need to actually refine them. This isn't a stage in which they're having to start from scratch and learn from the ground up. And so we want to invite his remarks this morning as we continue our conversation here about development and what the future is going to look like for the African continent and its US relations. We'd like to welcome you now, the Honorable Samuel Twea.
All right, thank you. Thank you. His Excellency Ernest Bai Koroma, former President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, His Excellency Honorable Ambrose Dlamini, Prime Minister of Eswatini, Excellencies, policy experts, economists, heads of organizations, members of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be given the opportunity to speak at the 5th US-Africa Investment Forum and Policy Dialogue under the theme, A Necessary Realignment. Let me thank Dr. Giami, publisher and CEO of the Africa Leadership Magazine, for the recognition and opportunity to speak. I express thanks for the role the magazine continues to play in stimulating challenges and opportunities confronting the continent, in stimulating transformative business leadership and highlighting challenges and opportunities facing the continent. The US-Africa Investment Forum provides opportunities to shed critical light on how US-Africa relations can potentially impact investment and development outcomes in Africa. This year's event is virtual because of a global pandemic that has taken almost 1 million lives and affected more than 32 million people. More than 75 years ago, a global crisis that wreaked far more disastrous the globe and unveiled an economic consensus that remains predominant today. Amid the impact of COVID-19 and the sheer possibility that its severity across continents could approximate alarming death rates and paralyze economies around the world, especially economies in Africa, the world appears to be hankering after a new kind of paradigm or global Weltanschauung. World leaders, heads of international organizations, think tanks, economists, and policy experts are chattering loudly at various conferences, in various forums and discussion groups on the importance of framing a new and different economic consensus that can deliver results that might enable countries, particularly low-income and developing countries, to better withstand the shocks from economic crises with orders of magnitude significantly greater than the Great Recession of 2008, or from global pandemics, health pandemics, whose impact might dwarf the impact of the Spanish flu of 1918, which took more than 50 million lives and affected more than 500 million people. While these discussions might seem like normal, perennial talk after a major crisis, which will soon buckle under the weight of the business as usual paradigm, the discussions this time have a certain seriousness to them. One feature of this seriousness is the reality that more than half of the world's population may now be acclimating itself to wearing face masks for the foreseeable future. If anything, the wearing of face masks is a constant reminder that something is seriously amiss in our world, and as a consequence, something radical, more meaningful, and more epochal has to give. In 2014, the world witnessed an explosion of a different kind of pandemic, the Ebola viral disease, which had always been on the African continent, but which had not shown the particular virulence observed in the Mano River Union region of West Africa. Unlike COVID-19, the 2014 Ebola outbreak was confined to 3 countries, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. Billions of dollars in emergency assistance flowed to these 3 countries. The death toll from this Ebola epidemic stands at more than 11,200 persons, about 37% of the current death toll on the African continent from Ebola. Despite this massive tragedy that was Ebola, the world largely saw Ebola as an African problem or a West African epidemic. The three countries were largely left to their own devices in dealing with the economic aftershocks of Ebola. The Liberian economy plunged to a GDP growth rate of negative 2.17%, recovery from which has been buffeted by subsequent macroeconomic headwinds and now by the corona epidemic. While the three countries received billions in emergency assistance, their respective healthcare delivery systems remain unable to cope with any serious epidemic, and their respective economies have never received any serious post-Ebola economic or investment stimulus to compensate for the impact from Ebola. Barely 6 years after Ebola, the world is now staring the brink of a potential economic precipice and is hopefully groping toward a more serious thinking about framing a post-COVID-19 economic consensus. This fifth U.S.-Africa Investment Forum and Policy Dialogue avails a fresh opportunity to explore the horizons and possibilities of changing the investment and development trajectory in sub-Saharan Africa. In the last 75 years since the end of the Second World War, momentous events have occurred, and with them, tremendous changes have been wrought in our world. We have seen the Vietnam and the Korean Wars. We have seen the onset of the Cold War and its decline, with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the end of the Soviet communism. We have seen Africa plunge into nearly 2 decades of conflict and violence for much of the 80s and 90s under the aegis of brutal dictatorships. But we also seen the continent climb from these maladies to the post-millennial era of democracy and economic growth, even if the growth has been sporadic in different regions, buffeted by macroeconomic instabilities. During these decades, we have seen China rise from a per capita GDP of $185 in 1977 to a per capita GDP of nearly $10,000 in 2018, lifting more than 700 million people out of poverty in the last 4 decades, the greatest poverty alleviation feat in recorded history. We've also seen Latin America and the Caribbean move from a per capita GDP of about $1,400 in 1977 to about $8,500 in 2019. Despite these seismic events and the changes they have engendered, Africa has changed very little. Per capita GDP in sub-Saharan Africa moved from USD $462 in 1977 to a meager $1,500 in 2019. This means Africa is presently where Latin America was more than 40 years ago. In the last 4 decades, Africa has made good progress, but has also remained in virtually the same place. An abundance of economic evidence and analysis have purported to show why Africa has not grown and developed as fast or as much as other continents or regions, and why the continent remains at the bottom of the economic ladder. The reality emerging from all these analyses is that global investment capital has not flown into Africa in the way it has flown in other regions of the world. In 1990, Nobel laureate Robert Lucas explored the reasons why capital has not flown to Africa or developing countries, despite the huge potential for economic returns to those investments. This criticism has been dubbed the Lucas paradox in neoclassical economic literature. Among economists, the predominant explanations for this Lucas paradox revolves around the quality of institutional governance in Africa or developing countries. There's no gainsaying the importance of institutional quality in the form of effective property rights, investment-friendly policies and regulatory frameworks, strong anti-corruption governance, and a stable and predictable policy environment. However, I argue that this lack of capital flows, which explains Africa's lack of infrastructure development, without which the continent's private sectors will be left in the lurch, cannot alone be explained by institutional factors from empirical studies. For example, sub-Saharan Africa's share of public-private investment or partnerships is the lowest in the world and is concentrated in 4 countries: South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda. This fact may appear to suggest that these countries are the best on global indices of government effectiveness, regulatory quality, or anti-corruption. I can hear choruses across Africa shouting, "So true." What this means is that factors underpinning sub-Saharan Africa's ability to attract global capital flows, or PPPs, may lie beyond empirical findings in economic papers and will require a complex array of approaches, among them undeniably the need for countries to continue to upgrade and improve their investment climates. Additionally, the most fundamental critique of the current economic or investment consensus is that while it has identified the lack of capital and investment flowing into sub-Saharan Africa as a major culprit, enabling or catalyzing these flows has not occupied a particularly high niche in the drive for global solutions. For example, official development assistance, which should help solve this problem, has itself been small or puny relative to sub-Saharan Africa and has been spent in ways that do not solve the binding constraints for private investment. In the last 60 years, Africa has received a mere 3% of what is classified as official development assistance. What is classified as official development assistance, with assistance going to other regions of the world. So the first issue is this: to the extent ODA is supposed to untangle complexities for investment flows in Africa, the share of ODA going to Africa to achieve this purpose is insignificant. More than US 33 trillion in ODA has been spent in all regions of the world since 1960, and Africa has received only 1 trillion. The second problem is that the US 1 trillion has been spent in a way that is not optimal for private investment. So as we grapple for change and new answers to Africa's investment challenges in the post-COVID-19 era, we must begin to ask the fundamental and hard questions. First, why is the share of resources that should help Africa's development so small relative to other regions of the world? If development assistance is smaller, of course, we should expect outcomes accruing to that development assistance to be equally smaller. Today, we celebrate South Korea, the South Korean economic miracle, and take for granted a neoclassical model that may explain Korea's emergence. But we must not forget that in the 1950s, South Korea alone received in development assistance the total amount of assistance that went to the rest of the world. So here goes your institutional quality or neoclassical argument. This example is provided to show that development assistance is and can be an important complement to private investment. And in contexts such as sub-Saharan Africa, where market and institutional imperfections abound, development assistance and private investment flows must move in tandem. So the menu of options for post-COVID-19 social and economic rethinking and paradigm redefining must be as rich and nuanced as it must be complex. I offer the following broad contours towards such a menu. One, the challenge of private investment must assume center stage within Bretton Woods multilateralism. The share of resources dedicated to resolving constraints to private sector investment must dramatically increase. This increase need not be at the expense of spending in the social sectors, which have seen the lion's share of resources. This increase must occur on the backdrop that private sector-led growth obviates the need for the large social sector spending we see under the current model, since the jobs that accrue from these expansions avail higher incomes. We must begin to perceive Africa's debt vulnerability as the immediate consequence arising from a combination of the inefficiencies in public infrastructure spending, from weaknesses in the bankability of large public investments, from the lack of private investment, and from anemic and sporadic growth. The narrative around Africa's debt crisis or challenges must change in favor of these more fundamental reasons. In other words, if the ability to service debt is not enhanced, the stock of debt would become the problem. As such, the stock itself may not necessarily be the problem. The World Bank notes that total debt for sub-Saharan Africa increased nearly 150% to $583 billion between 2008 and 2018. As a share of GDP, total debt in sub-Saharan Africa increased from 40% to 59% in 2018. Liberia's debt has risen from the debt waiver under the highly indebted poor countries initiative in 2006 to around 1.5 billion, or 46% of GDP today. About 1 billion of this stock comes from multilateral concessional loans that were expected to solve private sector constraints. The reality is that this debt stock has become a problem, limiting further borrowing because private sector bottlenecks constraining growth are still prevalent despite the concessional borrowing in the first place. 3, countries must continue to work aggressively on improving the quality, stability, and predictability of institutional governance. The government of Liberia is planning a massive forum on business and investment climate to address major challenges and regulatory issues in Liberia's investment climate. The aim is to rebrand Liberia as a top-notch for business and investment in the post-COVID era. The conference will be under the auspices of the Supreme Court of Liberia and will aim to sit with legal practitioners and judges at the center of efforts to reform the Liberian business and investment climate, considering the fact that business climate issues have serious judicial ramifications. The goal is to place Liberia as a premier destination for private investment. 4, sub-Saharan Africa must continue to ramp up anti-corruption governance. Liberia has just ended a 2-day anti-corruption conference. The conference is expected to present to President George Weah a roadmap for improving anti-corruption governance in Liberia, building on lessons from the last decade of governance. 5, we must change the way we have delivered development assistance. The Paris Declaration on Aid Effectiveness, the Accra Agenda for Action, and the Busan Accord have wonderful ambitions for ensuring development aid is effectively implemented or it complements private investment. But the evidence is that these big agenda items appear to have been overtaken by major events in the world since they were pronounced. Development assistance is still not delivered optimally, and we must return to these accords in the post-COVID era. For example, the accords avail developing countries a clear roadmap for improving the quality of institutional competence, governance, or delivery in developing countries through what is termed as use of country systems. Unfortunately, country systems are still largely not being used in a lot of countries and situations. This will have to change under the post-COVID consensus. Recently in Liberia, we launched a new aid and NGO policy to bring back the goal of the Paris Agenda into action. Governance and natural resource management in African countries must take on the challenge of value addition in the extractive industries. In the last decade, the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative has achieved greatly on availing transparency to the exploitation of natural resources in developing countries. Despite this progress, the share of extractive value added in extractive gross domestic product remains small, as natural resource countries continue to remain net exporters of raw materials, which exposes countries to the vagaries of commodity price whirlwinds. Governance around natural resource management must address the key challenge of economic diversification, which is a major driver of financial and macroeconomic instability on the continent. Liberia remains a natural resource exporter and has improved extractive governance. We continue to work in this area to attract more investments. The massive oil palm sector is taking shape in Liberia with strong value-added potential. Investments to add value to Liberian rubber are also happening, with the government working with stakeholders to achieve these in these areas. 7, the post-COVID-19 consensus must place at the disposal of developing countries the ability to recover more sustainably from economic crisis or from global health pandemics. Sustainable recovery means putting the right policies and the right incentives in place to drive sustainable economic growth. In agriculture, for example, if banks continue to remain risk averse, and if governments and multilateral partners are not able to develop de-risking mechanisms, African agriculture will continue to be largely subsistence. So some countries are making steady progress in the transformation of African agriculture, but progress remains very slow compared to the potential for change. The role of global finance and investment in African agriculture can clearly be enhanced. Another area for sustainable recovery and management is the area of climate change and environmental protection. Sustainable recovery means giving forest communities less incentives to cut down trees for livelihood support by ensuring these communities access resources from green climate funds or carbon credit markets. In many developing countries, significant complexities appear to prevent easier access to carbon credit markets that avail investment or development financing while protecting and safeguarding our climate and biodiversity. Serious action is needed in the post-COVID era. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the world is at a watershed moment in both the relations among nations and in the possibilities for delivering greater prosperity for the peoples of different regions. The government of the United States has played an exemplary role in preserving world peace and upholding the economic consensus that issued from the Second World War. America can impart a new sense of mission to galvanizing a new consensus that will reverse Africa's investment woes. The United States still enjoys the deepest bond with most African countries, and I believe US-Africa diplomacy and relationship can situate African investment challenges at the top of the global agenda. The financial crisis of 2008 that originated in the United States proved that the US remains the bastion of the global economic order. How does US investment and trade change the dynamics for African development? What should be done to unlock resources from American pension funds, for example, to close the African infrastructure financing gap, which the African Development Bank puts at between 70 to 107 billion United States dollars per year? Closing this financing gap should preoccupy policy wonks and experts concerned about Africa's transformation. US-Africa relationship should concern itself with this development. The US government's Millennium Challenge model is particularly critical to helping countries improve governance in exchange for receiving support for expanding the private sector. This model is seriously focused on private sector expansion, and we look forward to seeing the next generation of transformation happening under the MCC. Liberia presently has an MCC compact addressing challenges in electricity and road sectors and is working to qualify for a second compact. The United States Aid for International Development's new vision of joining to self-reliance has essential elements of the MCC model, which looks to unlock private sector potential. Our partnership with USAID will address key private sector challenges in the coming years. US-Liberia relationship will play a key role in bending the arc of development in Liberia. Free slaves from the United States established Liberia in 1847. Black Americans do not make much of this historical connection with Liberia for a variety of reasons. It is up to the government of Liberia to exploit this rich history in building a vibrant tourism sector in the post-COVID era. With COVID-19 all over the world, visitors and tourists from the United States to Liberia would no longer fear epidemics as they once did when the word Ebola was pronounced. US-Liberia investment dialogue should concentrate on these game-changing dynamics beyond normal patterns that have defined Liberia's relationship with the United States in the last 100 years. Our government will explore these paths in the years ahead. Excellencies, there is no doubt that enabled investment is the way forward. Left to neoclassical theories of incentive compatibility and institution, investments may not flow into Africa commensurate with the size of the continent's development challenges. These investment flows would have to be enabled by a combination of needed institutional reforms and other quasi-economic or diplomatic factors. The situation may differ from country to country, from one country to the next, but the consensus is unmistakable that the next century in Africa is a century of private investment. I trust the dialogue at this year's forum will do full justice to the opportunities and challenges that Africa faces in its attempt to transform. I thank you.
And again, we thank you so very much for those remarks on the process. And there's some questions that are out there that maybe it's wonderful for us to maybe just explore one or two of them as I look around and see who's on with us. I think that based on what the panelists were sharing earlier, our keynote speakers, as well as those that were presenting special presentations as well, there was an interest in trying to figure out exactly maybe some more specifics as to how investment capital will be able to flow. And I know that we had at least several speakers that did talk a little bit about that, both Mr. Dlamini as well as Mr. Twea. I would invite either or both of you, if you wanted to say a little bit more about this idea of direct investment and capital flowing.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
I think investment, capital flowing, I think is the bottom line. So FDIs have flowed largely. Investors have come for iron ore, diamonds, bauxite, those types of flows Africa has seen. Okay, that raises my question as to if institutional quality is the culprit. If we're saying governance challenges are the reason why flows are not happening in Africa, why do we see these flows come after iron ore in the first place? So that's the first curiosity that I had, that, okay, flows are happening in the natural resource sector, but flows are not happening in sectors that are not natural resource intensive. So there is a duality, there's a problem there. Why should Africa receive flows in iron ore, investments in iron ore, the FDIs, but not in investments that will relax constraints in road infrastructure, for example, PPPs, okay? Why aren't we seeing the PPPs that we see in Latin America, in Asia, even though there's a strong potential for return? So the conversation is that, yes, we want more of FDIs, and the problem with FDIs as they come, what is the value addition that we are having under that FDI model? We're just basically exporting our raw materials and leaving our economies. In Liberia, for example, we have a whole region, Bomi County, which used to be rich in iron ore mine. It's now a desolate region because the ore has been exploited. And then people live in abject poverty in the area. So that exportation of resource just for the sake of getting the revenue is not the model. While we appreciate the investment coming. We need to ensure value addition happens. So, as I said in my remarks, we'll continue to work on improving the governance environment to attract more investment, assuring regulatory predictability, more reforms of taxes and doing business. All of that is critical, making Liberia, making African countries go-to destinations for private investment. But the key issue is that investment has to go downstream. So as these investments come, we need to find a way to ensure they're not enclave investments, that they are affecting other sectors like agriculture, that we're having linkages across sectors. So I think that's the key challenge that we have to face. We agree, we acknowledge that Africa has to do more in terms of the quality of governance, but that is not the only answer. Okay, there is a way, there's a strategy to get more capital flowing, even under current equilibrium of governance. There is definitely a way, and I think that's where we want the new consensus to go.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful to think about that. And I don't know, Mr. Dlamini, did you want to add also, we saw the video, of course, about the economic investment in Eswatini, but maybe there are more elements that you'd like to share.
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. My view is that, what Honorable Samuel is saying is absolutely important in the context of Africa. What we have seen over the years has been investors who come here to basically extract value and especially mineral resources. Classic example is that, we, Eswatini, we've got a large deposit of iron ore. We mined iron ore for decades to Japan. And it came to a point where we really didn't see much value coming into Eswatini, and yet this natural resources was being exported to Asia. And the king decided to stop and said we need to resume mining this natural resource when it's going to benefit people in the kingdom. So we are currently exploring that and trying to set up appropriate structures and mines so that this question of value addition is explored, so that we don't export the raw material, but we actually beneficiate and we add value. Eswatini is endowed with a number of natural resources. We've got coal, we've got gold, but all of these are not yet really benefiting the country, and we are inviting investors to look at that. But what we know investors to be keen on is the question of governance, proper governance, safety and security for their investment. We guarantee that, and we think it's very, very important for any investor to be assured that their investment is safe. Obviously, the other key thing for foreign direct investors is they are looking for access to markets. Very, very important, and strategically, Eswatini is well positioned. As you saw in the video, we currently export basically to all parts of the world, all continents of the world. We also would like to see investors that are going to also focus on citizen empowerment, so that there is a local content component in the investment in the country, investment that will empower, in particular, our youth and women, give opportunities to those who are seen to be marginalized. Yeah, certainly, I think our view is that this is Africa's time. We have the youngest population in the world, and I think the sky is the limit for Africa. In the Africa Continental Trade Area is definitely going to unlock a lot of value in the continent. So yeah, we strongly believe that it is really going to, the outlook is very positive for the continent and the Kingdom of Eswatini. Thank you.
Thank you both so very much for helping us with those questions. As we're going to move into a panel discussion on Africa economic cooperation and investment opportunities in Africa, this will perhaps help us as well to advance our understanding of what the current opportunities are that might balance some of these trade relations. Before we move into the panel, though, we have a video presentation that will take us into a portion of the continent, into Nakuru County in the nation of Kenya. So we'll roll that video presentation and then we'll go to our panel.
What are your thoughts? Hello?
Sorry about that.
That's fine.
Okay, good. Yes, okay. Yeah, the trade is a conduit for growth. The Africa Free Trade Agreements, the ECOWAS Free Trade Initiatives, and all of these regional integration agendas are wonderful. I think Africa is looking to take advantage of this opportunity. But for trade to be optimal, countries and economies have to have a certain minimum of production possibilities. So the structure of production, the production structure of an economy has to be a certain minimum in order for that economy to be able to generate something value to trade with the rest of the world. And I think, so while trade is a conduit, the ability for countries to leverage that conduit is limited, given for example, the degree of infrastructure. All right, you take electricity, for example, in my country, where the electricity infrastructure is still deficient. We're making significant effort to expand our electricity production so as you can attract an investor that will not generate or produce at a tariff rate of 35 cents per kilowatt hour, but rather at 15 cents per kilowatt hour when the CNSG lines that are running through Cote d'Ivoire are erected. So trade, it's good to talk trade. We're doing trade, but countries, you'll soon find that many countries will be dumping grounds. So a few advantaged countries would produce and we export to the other countries. And if those countries are not sophisticated enough, they're not able to diversify their export basket, everybody would dump. Yep, they would be net importers. You don't want that. And so there are winners and losers in African trade. So a few countries will then win and we still get in the same situation. So I think the whole free trade thing is great. But the bottom line is that the fundamental constraints of infrastructure, things like roads, things like electricity, Africa is still behind. We're the last region, and the research shows that if we raise investment, if we close the infrastructure gap, you raise per capita GDP by about 2% a year in Africa. Imagine if we're closing our infrastructure gap as fast as possible, we are raising the per capita GDP, we are situating the ability of economies to produce better, to trade among themselves, and to trade with other groups. And I think that's where, so the argument of trade is an argument for infrastructure development. Okay, free trade says countries should be able to have something to trade, to produce, and not just receive. And there are some good examples, like Nigeria, for example, has done a good job in improving its agriculture. Liberia and Nigeria are beginning to cooperate. We want to learn some lessons from Nigeria very fast. I was in Nigeria, met the Nigerian finance minister, the central bank governor. We're trying to put together a framework to see how the success of Nigerian agriculture can replicate easily to Liberian agriculture, how trading opportunities between Nigeria and so it's a combination of things, but you wouldn't just say just because free trade exists, so Africa's going to come out. I mean, we still have our multilateral institutions, all of our development structure have to work with countries to regional integration, all of these to unlock potential in terms of productive capacity, for example, in agriculture, which is the lowest hanging fruit, we're still challenged there, so that we are able to export to Nigeria as well, to export to Rwanda, and not just, and export standard products. You're talking about technology, using technology to ensure that your basket is actually diversified and it's value added, or else you won't have much to trade and you'll just be a net recipient of goods from other countries.
Okay, thank you so much for that. But so let me just ask very quickly, as we all know, Liberia is perhaps the oldest partner or should be of the United States in Africa, considering the relationship that dates as far back as it does to the 1800s. What, in
Yeah.
your view, is responsible for the slow-paced growth in the trade relations between both countries?
I mean, I think, Liberia has been just a commodity dependent country. I mean, I would say in the first 3-4 decades after the Second World War, it does seem like we're merely exporting all of our raw materials. Enormous emphasis was not placed on diversification. That's the key point. And to this date, we're still burdened with this framework where we ship iron ore when the commodity price is high. For example, in 2010, the price of iron ore was 185. We were generating huge surpluses. We were benefiting, okay? And then when the price collapsed to $65 per dry metric ton, we ran into problems. So it's a question of how do you want to diversify? So our relations with the U.S. now going forward is going to be about how do we help Liberia to diversify to solve the fundamental private sector constraints. So the Millennium Challenge Corporation, for example, is helping Liberia to solve electricity infrastructure. So that's the best way. So by solving electricity infrastructure, you're gonna attract a U.S. firm that says, okay, if Liberia's electricity is improved, then we want to come into Liberia rather than just depend on the old model. Liberia has a run-of-the-river hydro, which has the potential of generating as much as 600 to 700 megawatts of electricity. Okay, this is going to be a game changer for Liberia in the future. We're doing a feasibility study to attract US firms and other firms to invest in that hydro because we now have what we call the CLSG transmission lines running through Cote d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, Guinea, where Liberia could be a net exporter in the region. That is the game changer for the electricity sector. So, we're looking to our partnership to address these big elephants in the room, and not the traditional model where, we have development assistance, we do a small thing in education here. Look, development assistance.
Oh, I don't hear.
It's a false. Hello?
Yes, sorry, your line went quiet just
Okay.
then.
Okay. It's a false argument to make the trade between aid and investment. No, more trade, more investment. That's not. Korea was helped. And, we were saying, if you took 2.5 billion in 1950 and gave to Korea alone, when that was the amount that the rest of the world received, imagine if countries like Nigeria, Liberia were receiving similar amounts in 1950, where would they be today relative to Korea? They'll be definitely in a different, equilibrium. So we need to harness all the possibilities of transformation. Trade is a definite ingredient in that because it opens up the markets. Infrastructure development is the key thing. We have to continue to look. Countries are not able to finance public infrastructure because they don't have the means. So private pension funds flows from Europe and America. We have to find a PPP framework that attracts these investments into Liberia, into Africa, or Liberia's infrastructure to solve them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I hope time will permit me to come back to you because I have quite a few questions for you. Thank you so much for that. So moving on to our next member of the panel, I'm going to come now to Rep. Billy Mitchell. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate that, sir. As I say, there are many, many. Do bear with me, Honorable. Bear with me, please, Honorable. I know you want to contribute to that. Just give me a moment. Can I just ask the House's permission if we can just take a little bit more of your time because we really should be coming to a close now. But you can see Honorable is eager to share something with us. And I'm not quite through with everybody just yet. I wanted to ask a few more questions of the governor. So if it's okay, and I do have a question also for our retired president. So if it's all right, please, may we just borrow, I will say just 15 more minutes of your time. So Thank you. If that's, I appreciate that. Thank you all so much. So Honorable, I'm going to come to you very, very quickly. You're eager to respond just then. So please take it away. Let's hear what you have to say. Honorable Tua?
I was just, I like his theme of the lack of engagement, and I think I agree with that. I mean, and I also like the fact that he's an African American and wondering what's happening back home in Africa. How can we strengthen the relationship between the U.S. and African countries, not just at national levels? We have structures like the African Growth Opportunities Act, AGOA, working in some areas, now working at between Congress and states. But I think we also need to go beneath AGOA, where there are state relationships, trading pacts. In the example of Nakura, you have Nakura in Kenya, which is like a county in Liberia, really, really having an investment for it. It's a clear model. That under that model, that county can engage with the state of Georgia. You can see through the same thing like a county like Maryland County in Liberia, or a Bombing County can have that relation with the state, so at that subnational level. We're looking to explore the historic ties between Liberia and the United States. And I would love to engage with the caucus here on how we really move, for example, tourism between African Americans and Liberia, which was founded by free slaves coming back from the United States. I mean, there's no better destination for African Americans to come to than Liberia, where, 173, 180 years ago, people left America and to establish freedom elsewhere in Africa. Let's explore what has been the consequence of that vision, that revolution. This would be something that we can frame a whole new partnership around. I want to hear what he would say. I remember hearing Professor Cornel West talk about this before, but unfortunately, we haven't found a way to engage the African American community as Liberians,
Okay.
nationally or subnationally. I wanted to hear that from you.
All right. Thank you, Honorable Tua. I really appreciate that. So you want to learn more about, you want to speak more to the caucus. You're glad that they're here. As we've been told, they're the right people to speak to. So I hope that you'll be able to engage further after this. But he wants to hear more about, forging this relationship and what can be done. Let me just give you an opportunity very quickly, Rep Mitchell, to quickly respond to that, please.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will tell you to the minister, honorable minister, what I would commit to you today. I don't believe that we can solve this problem right here, right now, but I commit to you today to us to a meeting to where we can forge our way forward, steps necessary. This is the exact kind of strategy that we're undergoing right now. And I would love to be able to include your suggestions in that process, because as I mentioned, 2 years from now, I want to be able to say that this has been completed. Your insight is just spot on to what we look to increase the opportunities between trade with the U.S. and the African countries. So I will leave my number. As a matter of fact, our ambassador, Dee Dawkins, she will have that so that we can continue this discussion and really forge some meaningful policy that will be mutually beneficial.
Thank you. Thank you so much.